Welcome to Finding Avalon, the podcast that amplifies disabled voices. I'm your host, Jenna, a disability inclusion advocate, communicator, and storyteller. This is a place where disabled folks correct the narrative by sharing authentic lived experiences. Join me as we explore life with disability through our lens, because representation matters. Welcome back to another episode of Finding Avalon. Every time you tune in, you help make positive change for disability inclusion, one story at a time. Today, we're joined by Ashley King. Ashley is a Mexican-Canadian visually impaired actor, playwright, writer, podcaster, and accessibility consultant. She's based in Calgary, Alberta, and her creative work intertwines accessibility, disability, and inclusion. Most recently, Ashley premiered her autobiographical play, Static, a Party Girl's Memoir, which she also adapted into a chart-topping podcast. Along with this impressive personal and creative feat, she advocates for disabled representation in the arts, disabled storytelling, and methanol poisoning awareness. Welcome, Ashley.
Hi, how's it going?
Very good. How are you doing?
Good, thank you. Thanks so much for having me.
Oh, thank you for making the time to chat with me across the miles and the time zones. I'm so happy to have you here.
Of course.
Actually, I wanted to start with a little self description. As you know, my name is Jenna and I use she, her pronouns. Being Irish Canadian, I have pale skin, large green eyes, I'm wearing berry colored lipstick, and I have wavy shoulder length brown hair with natural silver highlights that I'm keeping. I'm also wearing comfy peach and gray plaid pajamas and sitting here in my home office in Halifax, Nova Scotia. And right next to me is my fluffy white rescue cat, Leo, who has both hearing and vision loss. So this is a disclaimer that you may hear him at any point in the background.
Cute. I love it. Um, and well, my name's Ashley King. My pronouns are she, hers. I'm Mexican Canadian, so I've got quite fair olive skin, long dark hair, dark features. If I was standing, I stand tall at 5'1". Today I'm sitting here on my couch, just in some comfy velvet sweats and hoodie, and I also have my dog sitting next to me asleep, who naturally is just very vocal. So hopefully he stays asleep during our time together.
I love it. We've got the pets representing, right?
Hmm.
What do you think, Ashley? Should we jump right in?
Yeah, why not?
Wonderful. So, I've only learned about methanol poisoning recently, and it was actually from reading your story in the news. I read that methanol poisoning is a serious condition that kills thousands of people each year. I couldn't believe what I was reading, how improperly or poorly made alcohol can be toxic, with poisonings happening often in resort settings or popular tourist destinations. And I also read that the fatality rate of people who are poisoned by methanol can be up to 44%, with many survivors impacted by permanent vision loss or brain damage. Ashley, could you share more with us about surviving methanol poisoning and why it's so important to raise awareness around this serious issue?
Yeah, absolutely. So I was poisoned by methanol just over 13 years ago. I was living abroad in Australia doing a gap year between high school and university, and I decided to go to Bali. And on my last night there, went out for some drinks at a very like westernized, popular bar. It was no different from any other night that I'd been out prior. Like there was not really anything overly memorable about that night, um, but had a cocktail from the bar and flew to New Zealand the next day and woke up in my hostel about a day later and I was unable to see and breathe. Eventually, I found myself in the hospital, and doctors were pretty confused about what was going on with me. Eventually, they got my blood results back and realized there was a large amount of methanol in my system. Like most folks, I had never heard about methanol poisoning before. I had read about it in like one Lonely Planet blog entry during my travels. It said people had gotten sick from homemade alcohol in the past in Bali, and so to me that just meant don't drink any homemade alcohol, which but it didn't really register that that could be served to me in a bar or a restaurant. And many countries around the world, it comes out in the distillation of alcohol, and if it's not distilled correctly, it then gets sold to bars and restaurants, and a lot of folks will actually refill bottles that are familiar to tourists that are consuming the alcohol. So it's possible for you to buy it at a liquor store in, say, like um, a brand that's familiar to that country, but it's also possible for you to consume it as it will be in a bottle like Smirnoff or something like that, and then that gets served to patrons. So I unknowingly was served it. And yeah, it has an 80% mortality rate. So when you are poisoned, most people do die from it. I'm fortunate enough that I was able to get to medical attention as soon as I did. But as a result, it's left me blind. So I have about 2% of my eyesight, and that's kind of been my norm for the last like 13 years.
Wow. Ashley, thank you for sharing such a difficult experience. Did you just say 80% is the mortality rate?
Yeah, so most people do die from it, and when I was hospitalized, they actually made a medical journal on me because I was the first patient they had had since like the 80s, just to help other doctors trying to treat the symptoms. A lot of the effects can present as other conditions, so they kind of thought maybe I had taken drugs, or the conditions that I was presenting with is something they maybe would see in older patients, but for someone who was, like, young and healthy, it didn't make sense to them, and I hadn't put 2 and 2 together what the cause could be, so I wasn't much help until I got my blood results back and, yeah, realized that it was methanol poisoning. And the crazy thing about methanol is the antidote for methanol, to treat it, in the initial stages is actually pure alcohol. So in the hospital, they had to get me very, very intoxicated, and the drunker I was, the more I could breathe and the more I could see. And eventually, once your body is breaking down pure alcohol, it stops breaking down the methanol. And methanol is bad when your body metabolizes it because it turns your blood into an acid. So basically, it's your acidic blood that's burning all of your organs and your insides. So a lot of people do have brain damage or kidney failure or organ failure. So I'm quite fortunate that my only lasting effects was my eyes.
This is, I think, for anyone listening, incredibly shocking and a real education. And I have to commend your commitment to advocating to protect other people by raising awareness of what happened to you.
Oh, Phil, thank you. Honestly, like, it's something that people don't hear about. Every day I tell my story to people who don't know, and there's been very few times where I've told somebody and they're familiar with it. And I think it's something that most people don't know about and isn't spoken about. And, every so often it comes up in the news and people do start talking about it, but I think people start to forget about it, and you don't ever think when you go on vacation that something like this is going to happen to you. And it can happen to anybody. Like, you don't have to be some irresponsible, like, drunk 18-year-old or something for this to happen. Like, it happens all around the world, in resorts, in fancy places, like in not so fancy places. And so I just think being aware can save a lot of lives, and I would never want what happened to me to happen to somebody else. So yeah, it's the least that I can do, advocating and just spreading awareness about it.
Absolutely. And when you mention that sometimes this poisoned drink is put in containers that seem like they may not have been tampered with or seem like they're trustworthy or recognizable, it makes it even that much harder to notice.
Yeah, and it doesn't smell or taste any different, so you could consume it and have no idea that you've had a tainted drink. And like I said, the night that it happened to me, there was nothing memorable about the drink. There was nothing memorable, like, really about the evening. And so I I didn't necessarily like think I was making irresponsible choices or, putting my life in risk at the time. But now that I, know this is out there, like, especially when I do travel to other places, I stick to beer. I don't drink any spirits. I'll stick to duty free or like pre-mixed cocktails that come in a can, just because it does happen everywhere and people just aren't aware about it. And so many of people who are affected, it goes unreported. So if it doesn't make the news, people aren't hearing about it. Um, so unfortunately, we saw that in Laos at the end of last year in 2024, where there was a handful of people who had died from methanol poisoning. And so I think it's starting to make it into like the norm of culture, people talking about it and being aware of it, but it's still so underreported and unmentioned.
Thank you so much for sharing that. As a traveler myself, I constantly try to, of course, keep myself safe, but something like this, as you said, can happen so easily, no matter how responsible or aware you are. And so this is an incredibly important message.
Yeah, of course. And, when you're on vacation, this is the last thing that you want to think of or consider. And, I've met other people who are like, oh, that's just, a myth you hear from your parents, or, the idea of going blind drunk, like that doesn't actually happen. But obviously, I'm an example of it not being a myth, and that it actually does take place.
So, Ashley, I feel like your story is a prime example about how art becomes advocacy and vice versa. Can you share with us how you processed and came to terms with your vision loss and how you came to write and perform your play?
Yeah, of course. You know, I grew up acting, being like a theater kid, and when I lost my eyesight, I that was one of the first things I'm like, well, I'm never going to be able to do that again. And so for a number of years, I just didn't think that was an option for me, being on stage, being an actor. Um, and through like a series of like serendipitous things that happened to me, I found myself working for a theater company. I found myself meeting other people with disabilities who were actors and performers. And um, the more exposure I got to being around the arts, the more I started to believe, like, maybe I actually could pursue this. Like, maybe this could be a an actual possibility for me. And so I
Hmm.
did end up going back to school and doing like a 2-year acting program. And, a lot of people who are in the arts, they say, if you want to find work, make your own work. And that's especially prominent for people with disabilities. And so it was encouraged upon me to, try writing my own play. And also, they say, write what you know. And so it was easy for me to write about my own experience. And so, yeah, I was doing that for about 4 years until, I met the right people and had the right opportunities come my way until some theaters were wanted to produce it. And yeah, I ended up premiering my show Static, a Party Girl's Memoir, in September 2024, to really great reviews and really great experiences that people seem to have at the show. And then again, moving forward to turning it into a podcast, which also did really well. So yeah, I feel like it was kind of like the biggest therapy project I probably could have done surrounding my eyesight, because I really dived into what it was like to, go blind, and every single night would get up on stage and cry to a whole new audience about what happened to me, but also the more uplifting things and kind of the laughter that can come out of a terrible situation. I've really used humor throughout the years to cope with my experience, and holding on to those moments to get through the darker moments. And so, although the play that I wrote is inevitably a little bit sad with the topic that we go into, I try to keep it as light as possible and keep the laughs coming as much as I could. So, yeah.
I absolutely loved listening to it when I learned about you and discovered this, and you can certainly feel the levity in those moments, the dark humor, which I certainly appreciate, and also, the sorrow, the struggle, but also I had never heard anything like that in podcasts. I was blown away and completely binge listened. I wouldn't go I would not go to sleep. And I kept refilling my cup of tea and just kept going. It was incredible. You really put it across in a bittersweet but also beautiful way.
Oh, thank you so much for saying that. Honestly, I just kind of wrote what would be fun for me to do on stage in front of an audience and like what I, would want to do that would bring enjoyment. And I really do think um, that I took the darkest, most depressing thing that's ever happened to me, and I wanted to turn it into the most, like, fun thing that I could do that would hopefully bring joy to other people despite it being, a sad story at times, but I really wanted there to be some good that could come out of such a shitty situation that
Mm.
should never happen to anyone and shouldn't have happened to me, but if there is anything that I could do, uh to advocate it in a way that I would enjoy, like, doing a public speech is always fun, but, like, getting to wear, like, a bright sequin gold dress and 5-inch heels and stomp around on stage and gallivant is even more fun than just giving a speech. So, like, yeah, I definitely, wanted to do something that would be fun for me, but also fun for audiences, and then hopefully people would learn a thing or 2 as well along the way.
Accessibility in the arts is crucial because it ensures everybody can participate in and enjoy cultural experiences regardless of their ability. It's actually considered a fundamental human right to access art and culture without barriers. For those of us who have been involved in the arts and cultural world, the value of telling diverse stories is pretty obvious, but it may not always be on somebody else's radar. Ashley, can you tell us why accessibility in the arts matters to you so much and why it should matter to society?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing for me is if you're not making art accessible, for example, for patrons to just attend a theater show, if that's not been made accessible for, someone who's blind or deaf or whatever it might be, how can those people imagine seeing themselves on a stage if they can't even be in a seat? You don't
Mhm.
really have the ability to dream, to be an artist, whatever the medium might be, if that art isn't made accessible to you. And like I said, for myself, when I first lost my eyesight, I would Google like blind actors or blind performers and would not come up with much. And I'm like, well, if no one's doing it, then it must mean it's not possible. And I didn't even go to any theater shows because I was like, well, I won't know what's going on. So it's not made for someone like me. And the more that I've like grown with my disability and learned about accessibility and disability advocacy, I've realized like, oh no, wait, there are people out there who are making space for people with disabilities, but also being the folks with the disabilities on stages and performing or doing art. Um, and I think there's a common misconception that someone who's disabled, someone who's blind isn't gonna like going to a museum, or someone who's deaf isn't gonna wanna go to a concert. And maybe that might be the case for some people, but that's not the case for everybody. And you
Mhm.
can't give if you don't give someone the opportunity to experience it, then someone can't choose whether or not they like art. Personal taste wise, people might just not be into going to plays. But if you
Mhm.
can't even get somebody in a seat because you've made the experience inaccessible, then how are they even able to decide for themselves whether or not they like it or not? And I think our stages and screens are only going to be able to grow with diversity if we're making the experience itself accessible for people.
Absolutely agree with you.
Yeah, and now, like, I mean, I go to plays all the time, and there was a bit of, like, when I first lost my eyesight, like, I didn't know my right to somebody with a disability. I didn't used to see inaccessible things as frequently as I do now. Now, I'm the first to notice, like, "Oh, there's not a ramp here," or "There's not this here," or whatever, and, now I know too much, and so sometimes it's a little bit like, "Oh, the world is moving so slowly," opposed to not knowing before, but yeah, I do think that it's slowly changing, it's slowly evolving, and the best part, I think, is looking at other people who have come before me, like, Bruce Horak is one of my mentors, who is a legally blind actor. He's in the new Star Trek, if you've watched that. And so he's a pretty successful actor who has made a very wonderful career for himself. And so looking at people like that gives me hope that, maybe I can have a full professional career in the arts. And I hope that like I can do the same thing for people who come after me.
Yeah, for sure. Sometimes you also become that representation that was hard to find or that there were few examples of. And I think that's pretty powerful as well.
Yeah, and even, like, going to theater school, like, learning, certain things in theater school, can be quite visual, and, like, even the art of acting was created and taught through, like, a very Eurocentric, ableist lens. Like, some of the activities you do aren't made for somebody who might be in a wheelchair or might not be able to see, and so there's been times where I feel like I'm rebuilt or building the wheel, I guess, trying
Mhm.
to figure out, how do I do this? How do I read a script and take notes when I can't even see on a piece of paper? And so it's been a lot of like coming up with creative solutions, but for most things in my life, coming up with creative solutions to figure out how to get to the end goal.
And I guess that you've also discovered workarounds that you creatively invent as part of the problem solving that a lot of disabled people end up doing in life.
Yeah, and like part of my job, I teach like an Access 101 class to a lot of theater artists. And a lot of people, I think, when it comes to accessibility, are worried about doing accessibility the right way. But a lot of the times I tell folks that the best way to do accessibility is just to come up with a creative solution. Like most of the ways that I've figured out how to, do everyday tasks in my life isn't because, I went to like a school for the blind and they are all teaching me. It's been me just coming up with creative solutions and trying out different things and finding a way to work and working with people who are willing to like think outside the box and come up with a solution opposed to being like, oh, well, we don't know, so we just won't try. So working with some
Mhm.
really great folks who are willing to try and fail and try again and just be open to maybe going away from like this colonial traditional way things have always been done and doing things differently because not it's not one size fits everybody, it's like one size fits one. I think a big thing like changing people's perspectives of like I'm capable of doing the same performance as somebody on stage. I just have to be let in the door. Like, if you let me, like, I
Mhm.
can show you. I've been fortunate enough that I've met a lot of people who have been willing to let me show them and prove to them. And of course, I've met folks who don't get it, who just, assume, "Oh, well, you're disabled. Why would you wanna do why would you even enjoy doing that?" I'm like, "Of course I would." Like somebody said
Yeah,
to me, they're like, "Well, do you like traveling? You can't even see." I was like, "There's so much more to traveling than just seeing?" There's so much
absolutely.
more. Yeah, and
All
so
all of the senses and the experience is not just limited to whether
yeah,
you can see
exactly.
it or not. Feeling it is involves so many other things.
Yeah, exactly, and so I think just, like, changing people's perspectives, and the more people see, someone like me doing those things, the more their perspectives do change. Like, oh, like people like you or with a disability do exist and want to be out there and enjoying cultural experiences just as much as like an able-bodied individual. So yeah, it's a slow moving track, I guess. But I don't know. But I'm seeing changes, and that's always great.
And as a continuation of accessibility, what does that look like? And what are some examples of best practices of accessibility in the arts community?
Yeah, well, there's a couple different things if you're looking at it from the patron experience or from like an artist on stage. But as a patron for myself, I love attending when there's audio description. So that's description that's embedded in between dialogue. That's usually described to you by somebody who's on a headset, and that makes such a difference in being able to consume a storyline and knowing what's going on stage. Same thing with like touch tours, which are usually pre-show experiences where you can go on stage and get an idea of how the set is laid out and feel the props and feel costumes, so that you have a more like three-dimensional experience of consuming the show. Then again, also being an actor, like there's lots of different ways you can make the rehearsal room accessible for people who come in, or the audition process accessible. So, like, um, sometimes I've auditioned for things where the only available script is a piece of paper. And I'm like, well, I can't read that. So I need the
Yeah.
electronic version of that. Um, and, for the most part, people are like, yeah, yeah, we'll get you the electronic uh, version of this. But a lot of times scripts are just books. And so they're like, well, we don't have that. I'm like, well, your audition experience isn't accessible then. Um, or, not forcing people to be memorized, for folks who, that may be like a little bit out of their range when auditioning. And even just saying that people with disabilities are welcome into an audition room already gives me the feeling that, like, okay, this isn't going to be a strike against me because I have a disability. During my play, when we were developing the set, there were certain things built into the set that to the average audience member would look like just a visual aspect to the set that might just be pretty and cute. But really, they were pretty things painted on the stage so I knew where I was supposed to stand. And they were done in colors that I could make out with my eyesight and find my light because I couldn't see where I was supposed to stand in my light. Um, and when we would explain that to folks, people would be like, I just thought that was a pretty thing on the stage. I was like, yeah, but it actually was there for my accessibility. Um,
Right, it had a dual purpose.
yeah, exactly. And so working with like set designers who are really open to trying new things and not just being like, well, there's no purpose for it, so why would we do it? Like that's made my experiences so much better. And um, I always worry that people think that, like, if they don't have it perfect, they're too scared to try, like, in terms of best practices. But I think just,
Yes.
like, the willingness to give it a shot and, knowing that people might fail, and it might not be perfect, but the willingness to just be creative about it, I think is real what folks should be doing and trying to do more of.
Also, I was thinking for people with hearing loss, there's sign language interpretation,
Yeah, absolutely,
and
and, the other thing too is, like, why not have a deaf actor on stage? You could put
mhm,
it right in the production. A thing that I tried to do with my play, was to make anything that was visual very, descriptively written into the play, which is why it did so well transitioning into podcast because we don't need to see what's going on in a podcast. And so during my play, I tried to embed any audio description that I would use during the play. So there was audio description available at my play at the end of the day because we had some visuals that were happening on stage. But especially for anything that I was trying to do myself as an actor, I wanted to, if I was putting in like makeup in the show, I put on makeup and I verbalize what I was doing. And a lot of times in theater, they say show, don't tell, which I hate. It's such an annoying
yeah,
phrase because it is the exact opposite of what I need. And
yeah,
I think we can tell and do it in a really eloquent way that doesn't feel like this rigid accessibility edition, but it feels like creatively done in a way that you don't even notice it.
absolutely. And I love to go to Broadway and West End London and anywhere else that I can go, but I also really hope for, I don't ever assume that it's gonna be there, but I hope for a sensory friendly space or even a little place I can move off to if I'm overwhelmed. But most especially, I have a lot of, pain and immobility issues, so it's very difficult to queue in a very long line waiting outside. As you know, outside of the theaters, there's always a very long line. Sometimes I need a stool, sometimes I need other assistance. And I found at Hadestown and Moulin Rouge, both of those experiences were top notch. The accessible seating without any fuss, without making a big deal about it. It
Mm,
was very, very dignified. It was like, yes, come on in early. It's warm in here. Have a seat here. And then, in fact, saying, you know what, I think this one is a more comfortable seat, and then moving me somewhere else without me ever having to ask for it. I was so, so grateful, and just more recently this fall, I was at in West End, London, and I saw Six, and they also had a chair for me inside of a warm space and helped me to my seat. Just a very dignified, easygoing, if you need anything, my name is, and enjoy your show. And it makes all the difference.
Totally. I always talk about anticipating the needs of your patrons, because there's nothing more frustrating when you're disabled, having to always ask for whatever it might be. And it's such a better experience when people are anticipating your needs and offering things, because half the time I don't even know what I'm allowed to ask for. And if you're already offering me a seat somewhere or help to concession or whatever it might be, it just makes like you said, a much more dignified experience and takes off the feeling of being like a burden.
And also that stress of the unknown. What am I going to encounter? Is there going to be any kind of discomfort or embarrassment, or will I feel like I'm asking for too much? For example, with the production of Six, I didn't even know that there were discounted tickets for people with disabilities. And many places probably might not even tell you that. And the amount of communication prior to, because of course I just sent an email saying, "Hi, what kind of accessibility features might you have?" And they not only gave me an excellent seat, but they said, "Yes, this is the cost of the ticket. And if you need a companion ticket, we have this as well." And things I hadn't even thought about, because for a very
Yeah.
long time I didn't ask for accommodation. Only in the last, I would say, 3 years, I've started, well, because my mobility and pain has really, really kicked off in that period of time, and so I just bit back and said, why am I why am I ashamed to ask for this? Because of course we know there's so much internalized ableism, no matter
Mhm.
how aware we are as advocates and, trying to understand how ableism is harmful, but it is really deeply embedded. And so now I say, okay, I'm going to ask the question and let's see what happens.
Totally, and that kinda touches on what I was saying earlier, like, when I first lost my eyesight, I was so uninformed about access, and, like, accessibility isn't just, like, a ramp, it also is financial accessibility, cultural accessibility, and the thing about theater too is it's so traditionally quite stuffy, and, like, the fact that you
Hmm.
can't leave a theater when in the middle of the show and whereas, like, when you can make it a relaxed environment, you can leave the theater if you need to or step away or go into a quiet space, um and I think the UK is a really great example of where they're always a little bit further ahead of us in like everything. And so I feel like they're a really great example where like accessibility is being done well and we're slowly getting there. Um, I would agree with you. My time like on Broadway in New York and in the West End, I've had such amazing theater experiences. And then I come back to like Canada, I'm like, I know what you could be doing, like, you could be doing so much more, like, you're really doing the bare minimum right now, um, and so, yeah, I think people need to look at, accessibility as, like, more holistically, and how else can you make the experience accessible, like, letting people know ahead of time what to expect, because as somebody with a disability, the amount of anxiety around leaving my house and all the things that could go wrong going
Hmm.
to an outing, and especially if you're doing it by yourself, like, my anxiety isn't off the charts when I'm, like, with a partner or somebody, a friend who I know, like, has my back, but, I always explain, when theater companies throw an accessible experience and maybe they don't have a big patron population show up, using the accessible features, I'm like, "You also have to remember that, like, letting people know what to expect ahead of time, that there could be somebody there to greet them or get them to where they need to go." Yeah, it makes a huge difference. And everybody's needs are so different too. Like I always the theaters that I work with, if they're planning for a blind audience, my visual impairment is going to be so different to somebody else's visual impairment. And so what I might need might be completely different to somebody else and what they might need. And so just being open that you might try and plan for everything, but like it's one size fits one. Like what my accommodation needs and accessibility needs are going to be vastly different to somebody else. And just like the more ways you look to make the theater going experience accessible, like just the more doors it opens for more people.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I wanted to talk with you a little bit about authentic disabled representation. And We know it's still lacking in mainstream media and also in the theater world, in the arts world. Can we talk about representation on stages and in film?
Yeah, I think it is not great. So often, if you see somebody with a disability on theater or on television or in film, it's it's deriving a purpose to the story. So, like, opposed to somebody just they just happen to have a disability and they're just a character and that's not their storyline. Their storyline is could be nothing to do with that. But a lot of the times disability representation is something to drive a storyline. And I don't think it has to be like that all the time. Like that
Mhm.
it doesn't like, for example, with the show that I wrote, I tried so hard to avoid it being inspirational.
Yeah.
Inherently, my editor for my play was like, "Unfortunately, Ashley, your story is inspirational, so you're gonna inspire some people." Like, unfortunately. And I was like, "But I just wanna come across like your basic fun party girl who just happens to be blind. Like, that's
Mhm.
just something that happens to be the case. Like, for example, people often when I'm auditioning for things on film or whatever, they're like, show us your disability. I'm like, well, my disability is
Oh,
invisible because I'm blind. And
yeah.
like, well, can you use your cane? I'm like, well, I don't use a cane. And so it's like they want that like it's like somebody in a wheelchair, if someone can understand, like, "Okay, I get it, you're in a wheelchair, you can't take stairs." But especially with, a visual impairment,
Mhm.
people, want to see it, and it has to serve a purpose. I'm like, "Well, I
Yeah.
don't walk around with a cane and a dog and, um, have sunglasses on." Like, yes, there are some people who do, but that's that's not what disability always looks like. And I think and I get that all the time. People are like, "Well, where's your cane and where's your dog?" And, "Well, you don't look blind." I'm like, "Well,
Ugh.
you don't look sighted." Like, I don't know, like,
Yeah. Yeah.
people think it has to follow some sort of norm that society has perpetuated, and it really doesn't. And, my agent tells me, like, "Maybe you should get some headshots showing your cane, showing your disability." I'm like, yeah, but that's not real. Like, yes, some people use a cane, but I don't. And why do I have to show that? Like, just to prove that I'm disabled? Like, you know?
Mhm. Because it's ableism. It's
Yeah,
it's
exactly.
it's blatant, it's like, even if you're not an actor, if you're just anybody, how often are we expected to perform or prove our disability for non-disabled people so that they can put you in a box and go, "Oh, okay. All right, I deem that to be legitimate," or "I recognize what that means or what that looks like."
Yeah, no, it is frustrating and like, disabled folks make up a significant amount of our population. So our stages and film should reflect that. Like that's what real life looks like. And I think the more that theater or film perpetuates the stereotype, for some people who've maybe never met somebody with a disability or been exposed to it, the reason they think what somebody with a disability should or shouldn't look like, I say in quotes, is because film and pop culture is representing it improperly. So the longer that we have these like stereotypes or, that somebody has to be a certain way, the more we're just like improperly informing people who consume that.
Yeah, completely. And what do you think needs to change when it comes to biases around storytelling, writing, and casting disabled folks?
Definitely like the inspirational porn of storytelling when it comes to disability. I feel like yes, I was able to write this play about what happened to me, but that's not my only story that I'm able to tell. There's lots of other stories I could be sharing that aren't even vision related. But it so often that's what people want. They want the inspiration, they want the tragedy, and I think we could just be more open to other types of storytelling that doesn't reflect that. Um,
Mhm.
and it's hard because I guess some people want it and it makes them feel good, but like to be that
Yeah.
trope, that inspirational trope is exhausting. And I don't look at myself in an inspirational way. I'm just like you. I have my faults. I'm not a good person all the time. I'm not faultless in my behavior or anything like that. I just happen to do it without eyesight.
I think is so important that when we represent ourselves authentically, and that it doesn't always have to be, I am a disabled X, Y, or Z. Disability is part
Yeah.
of what we live. Absolutely, significant part of our lives. But
What and it also
that's not all we are.
yeah, and it also it holds you to this, like, pedestal of having
Mhm.
to be this, like, perfect inspirational person, and, like, and what about the days where I'm not being inspirational, like, I'm
Mhm.
breaking down and I'm actually struggling with, like, my vision loss and ableism and all the hard things that come with living with a disability. What am I that day, you know? Like, I think it
Mhm.
almost like you can't have bad days and you can't not be an inspiration at 24/7 because if you
Yeah.
can't do it, then it really must be impossible, you know? And so I get it from folks all the time, and, I often remind them, I was like, "Well, you should have seen me, like, year 2 of me being blind because I was not very nice and not very happy with the situation that I was in, and I don't think you would have called me inspirational at that point." Like,
Mhm.
yes, I've
Yeah.
I've made it through, what I've gone through, and chances are you would do the same thing too. Like, what is my other option other than just getting on with it and finding out
Yeah.
how to move forward, you know?
There's so much nuance to our identity as people living with disabilities.
Yeah, totally. I was, snowboarding this past weekend, and, I used to be a pretty big snowboarder before I lost my eyesight, and so now I've learned how to do it with my disability, but it is incredibly difficult, super frustrating, really annoying at times because I'm like, "I used to be able to do this, and now it's just so much harder." And my partner had to remind me, he's like, "Remember, there are many people who are sighted that would never try what you're doing." I'm like, "I don't care. I'm still annoyed by this right now." Like, this is still pissing me off. I'm sure what people wanted to hear when I got off the hill was like, "It was so great, and I'm just so glad to be out there." And I was like, that was stupid. I was annoyed. I was a bad day. I fell a lot, and I had a bad time, and I'm excited to be going home now.
But that's real, and it's so appreciated.
Yeah, and, even in my play, I tried to show the, like, not so pretty sides of my
Mhm.
character because I don't think that just because you have a disability does not necessarily make you a good person. You can still be an asshole, and so I
Yep.
wanted to show, like, a flawed person because that's just more realistic to at least my lived experience, like, that I haven't always been, this quote unquote "inspirational person." I still struggle, and yeah, I really wanted people to not love my character every moment of the play, like, to be a little
Mhm.
turned off by my character at times, you know?
I found those parts very satisfying because it resonated with me as well, and each time that you would reveal just you're human, you're flawed. It's very real and very relatable.
Oh, thank you so much. Yeah, it was, I really tried to show flaws, just because that's just real life, you know?
Mhm. In your opinion, why is it important to tell disabled stories through theater and podcasting and the creative projects that you do? And what kinds of things have you been noticing and learning along the way?
Because they exist. I think, uh, by not sharing disabled stories, is pretending that people with disabilities don't exist, and that they don't have something to say. That's just not true.
Mhm.
And people, I think, with a disability, like, have a different perspective and look at the world through a different lens, and there are stories that deserve to be heard and told, and I am seeing it happen more. It's still not, I think, where it could be and should be. I think the more people, like, today listening to your podcast, and this is a great example of, like, putting out these conversations because they don't just happen, like, in a vacuum, and it's only just disabled people talking to other disabled people. Like, I think the whole world should be informed about other people's experiences. At the end of the day, like, you should do things that make you happy, and if sharing your story or telling your story brings you joy, then, do it for yourself at the end of the day, more than doing it for anybody else. I'm
Mhm.
glad people have heard my story and, have taken something away from it, but selfishly, I did it for my Leo self.
And there's also great power in creating because you feel that urge and that need to create something.
Absolutely. I do think, like, people do get so much from art, and every time I go to a show, I'm always so affected to take something away from it, and I had somebody in theater tell me once, I think when I was talking to him about this play, "I want people to feel XYZ." And they're like, "It's not up to you, about what
Mhm.
they're gonna feel. They're gonna feel whatever they're gonna feel. All you can do is put it out there and see what happens." And so I started being like, "You know what? It actually doesn't matter what people take away or what they feel. Um, what matters is, like, what it brings to me as the performer and the creator." And so I do think, uh people should, even if they don't think someone's gonna listen, it's worth putting it out there, and you don't know, maybe somebody will.
Mhm. Actually, what's a common misconception about disability and how can we change that narrative?
Oh,
There's so many, I know.
everything. Just like I said, someone saying to me like, "Well, you must not like traveling because 'cause you're blind." I was like, "I can still eat." Like, what do you mean?
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, I think that people might think that I live a lesser than life. I'll speak from, like, from myself, like, that I don't have, like, a life worth living, or people always say to me, like, "Oh, there's no way I could do what you've done." Um, and I'm like, "You probably could, and you'd eventually find joy and happiness too." Like, yes, it's taken me a while to get here, but I do live a fulfilling life. I don't know how to say it well, but just that I have a life worth living. That's such a simple question, but a very hard answer.
And there's so many assumptions that are made, and they're based in stigma
Totally.
and ableism. And then my answer often is you don't know what you're capable of.
Mhm.
You don't know what you will do to adapt and survive and make a meaningful life until you have to do it. And again, like there are things I know I will face as my disabilities progress. I might not even know how I will cope with that in the future, but I think this is part of that survival and that resilience. You will find a creative solution. You will find it within you. And
Mhm.
there's still so much beyond that is worth living for.
Yeah, and that's the thing, it's like there is a life worth living, and I say the same thing to people all the time, like, you don't know what you're capable of until you are faced with it. And certainly I was never thinking like, "Oh, one day I would probably be a really good blind person." Like, I'd probably be really good at that. Like, never crossed my mind that that I thought I would be able to move on and live my life. And 19-year-old Ashley, when this all first happened, would never imagine myself at 32. And I've got a friend who recently, like, lost their eyesight, due to a stroke, and she often, like, compares herself to where I am, and I'm like, "Girl, do not compare yourself to me because I was there, I was in your shoes and did not see the way forward, but you find it."
Well, beautifully put. Actually, I want to move on to a very lighthearted question, and it's all about music. As you might know, the Finding Avalon podcast has a companion piece, which is a playlist that's called Finding Avalon Season 1 Tunes. Very original name that I came up with myself. Yeah, I brainstormed on that a long time. I was curious if you had a song or two that you enjoy that speaks to your experience or thoughts of disability so that I could add these to the playlist.
Yeah, so there's one song, the music video is a great example of bad representation. So the song
Okay.
is "Hello" by Lionel Richie.
Okay.
Have you seen the music video?
Yes.
I had never seen the music video, and I had somebody describe it to me, and I was like, "There's no way this person is blind. This is not how blind people act." And just the lines be like, "Hello, is it me you're looking for?" So I just think it's such a funny, like, bad, cringy music video, and whenever I hear that song, I'm, like, thinking about all the things I'm looking for in my house all the time, and, all the things I lose. And so I don't know, I just think that
Yeah.
song's a funny play on words for being blind.
Yeah, it's certainly like that 80s era
Yeah.
romanticism, and,
Yeah.
it's again almost like a soap opera, but no, I remember
Yeah.
this distinctly from childhood, watching it, and I can still see shots of that video, so that's a great one.
Yeah.
What's another
Yeah.
one?
Okay, so, um, years ago, Drake came out with a song called YOLO, which is "You Only Live Once."
Mhm.
And, I was out for dinner with friends and just being a menace, and, was telling our server, "Yobo, you're only blind once." I've tried to start the hashtag, I've tried to get it going, no one's on board, but, like, it's, if nobody wants to be blind, and so making light of being like, "You're only blind once, come on," like, yeah, people aren't really, it didn't take off, but, that's by Drake, and so when that song came out, I always was like, "Maybe I'll come up with my own version about being blind."
I challenge you now, having heard this, I challenge you with all your creative prowess to come up with a great satirical version of
Yeah,
Yobo.
yeah, yeah, maybe that's my next create activity. But honestly, any I love any kind of music that just makes me feel cute and, like, kinda like a badass,
Mhm.
and, like, gets me hyped.
Mhm. Yeah, I love it. That's great. I will definitely be adding both of those. The list is getting longer and I love it, and it's super random because I ask different guests what they like. I throw on ones that I like, and it will make a nice random dance party playlist someday.
Love that so much.
And Ashley, last question for you. In 3 simple words, what does disability inclusion mean to you?
Human rights, period. Like, I almost wanna say, like, duh, like, obviously.
Mhm.
Um, it shouldn't even be why is it important? It's like, is air important? Is water important? Like, just a human
Mhm.
right.
Yeah, it's not optional, it's a must.
Mhm. Mhm.
I really appreciate you sharing your story and your message on the show. And also, personally, I want to thank you for supporting another disabled advocate on the other side of the country. And I've learned so much from you even before I met you. And now having talked with you, I feel like I've learned so much.
Oh, no, thank you so much. It's absolutely my pleasure. Like, likewise, I think, it can feel really lonely having a disability sometimes, but there's
Mhm.
so much to be said for, finding your people and just having someone to relate to, and it's so great speaking to another person with a disability who just can finish my sentences and be like, "Yeah, I get it, uh-huh, uh-huh."
Mhm. Well, you know what? I really believe that telling our stories in creative ways benefit everybody. So before we wrap up, what would you like to share about your upcoming projects and plans, and how can people find out more about you and support what you're doing?
Yeah, so people can find me at my website, which is www.ashleyjenniferking.com. And that has a little bit about what I'm going up to and also links to my podcast called Static, a Party Girl's Memoir, which is available wherever you find your podcasts. I'm hoping to tour my show. So the next step is looking for theater companies nationally and internationally that would like to produce Static and hopefully seeing where that goes.
Amazing. I'm so excited for you. And I feel like we could talk forever and never run out
I
of things to
know.
say. Right?
Oh, thank you so much. I It's been such a pleasure chatting with you. I've had such a great time.
Oh, thank you so much. The world that we're in right now, especially in times like these, needs the mavericks and the creatives and the truth tellers to break through stigma and stereotypes. And you're doing just that. So big respect.
Oh, thank you. Likewise, likewise, likewise.
Thanks as always for listening along. Please don't forget to follow, share, and rate this podcast to help others discover authentic disabled content. Special artist thanks and credit for the unreleased feature song Coal Miner, written by Steve Hoskins, arranged by Naomi Kavka, and performed by Naomi Kavka, Bryn Porter, and Tony Kostelik. Thanks again, everyone. See you next time.